Hi, I'm Ashley Rooney from Lexington Remembers World War II. And today I'm going to be talking to Charles Brown Ketcham, who has quite a story to tell of his experiences in the Army during World War II. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles now.
All right.
Welcome. I'm so glad you came, Charles.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be asked and to share what I can. Uh, I was drafted into the Army right out of high school, um, just before the advent of D-Day.
Mm.
Uh, so I had applied for training as a naval officer and was rejected because of stigmatism in my vision.
Oh,
And they would accept no one with glasses or need for glasses. And so I ended up being drafted, and uh, I had done fairly well on the tests which preceded my application for the Navy. So I was sent to Camp Stewart, Georgia, to become a meteorologist, and I was asked to learn how to use a theodolite to measure balloons, so that we could get wind readings for the anti-aircraft guns, the big 120 millimeter guns that shot down the high bombers. But shortly after I arrived there, I was told that nobody was in danger apparently as a meteorologist, and so they didn't need me. And they
must
sent
have been
me
so disappointed.
to Camp Housey, Texas, for a 6-week advanced infantry training, which I completed, and was then immediately shipped to Boston. And from Boston, I boarded a liner with 1,000 or so other GIs, went to Glasgow in Scotland,
Yeah.
took the train down. By this time, the fighting was in France, and in the center of this for the kind of thing that for which I'd been prepared, Bastogne and armored warfare was already happening.
Mm.
My division was the 10th Armored Division. I was in the 54th Armored Infantry Battalion, and this was in Bastogne during that heavy advancement by von Rundstedt and the German army, which broke through the American lines at that time. And the number of casualties was great at that. And I was there to, not in Bastogne, actually it was after Bastogne, to be a replacement for one of those killed during the fighting there. So I joined in what was known as the Ardennes, Metz, and Trier. I don't know how much to say about what being in an armored division is like, but
Give
it
us a
would be
little
helpful.
Give us a little feeling about what an armored division is like. Most people won't know that.
Well, it is comprised of tanks and also armored infantry and armored artillery, and we have engineers who came with us. And in this kind of warfare, you operate in sort of attack teams, as opposed to foot infantry, who have to slog their way through the various battlefields and terrible weather that we were having at that time, December, January,
Oh,
1945.
you were operating under which general? Was this under
I
Patton?
was with General Patton, Third Army,
Okay.
and General Morris was my general at that time, but we were all under Patton, who was an absolutely remarkable commander of armored warfare.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you ever meet him?
I never did meet him.
Okay.
Saw him once, but never met him. We had a love-hate relationship with him as infantrymen.
Yeah.
We loved him because he had backup and supplies and ammunition. Everything that we needed was always there. It was there on time. We had gasoline for our tanks and for our half tracks. And the infantry that worked in this capacity were divided into squads, and there were 8 or 10 of us in each squad, and each of us had each group of 10 was assigned a half track. Now, a half track is a vehicle that has a tank kind of tread in the back and the wheels in front, but can move very swiftly. It was a very potent, aggressive weaponry for a tank division. There was a 50 caliber machine gun in a turret at the front. There were 2 30 caliber machine guns, one on either side, and then there were the 8 of us who were inside an open but covered area of steel-plated sides. And when we go into a battle, we always go with 2 tanks, or usually go with 2 tanks in the lead, followed by 2 half tracks. One of them filled with soldiers. The other one, we as soldiers were having to ride on the backs of the lead and second tanks, because we had to be there, sitting there with our rifles in case the enemy would come up with rockets or would try to blow the tread off our tanks.
Right.
So we were, it was a pretty exposed, vulnerable position to be in. And we were glad when we were rotated out, actually.
I bet you were.
We could move very rapidly, respond very rapidly, and so I started in the Ardennes, and in the battle for Trier, and we fought our way over to the Rhine River, crossed the Rhine at Mannheim, and then we headed south. And at this time, probably under the direction of General Eisenhower and Patton, we would be fighting with, not against, the French First Army, and who were coming in from the south and from Italy, and the Patch's Seventh Army, which was coming in from the south as well. So we were with the Third Army, French First, Patch's Seventh Army, and then back into the Third Army again.
Well, did you enjoy working with the French? Could you all understand each other? How did you?
No, it was a hilarious relationship, really. I remember going down one valley, and suddenly there were shells coming over the hill, and airbursts were around, and so our tanks and some artillery started firing back over that hill, and pretty soon a Piper Cub, which was a small aircraft, and was used as an artillery observer, flew over and actually literally dropped a note saying, "For heaven's sake, stop firing. These are the French." And then he flew over and did the same to the French, apparently. And then we met at the end.
Yeah.
Well, there was a big celebration. Everybody hugged everybody, and it was not a disciplined experience the way it is with Patton. With Patton, everything was ordered and orderly and business. But with the French, when we got to the village at the end and taken that village, the French camped down and started cooking chickens and other things that they found, and we had a party, and
they brought out the French wine and everything.
Oh yes, they had plenty of French wine.
And at this point, you're about how old? About 19, 20?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, no, I was, let's see, at that time I'd be just 19.
Amazing.
I actually, I was in combat as an 18-year-old. Even though Roosevelt had said, made a declaration that nobody under 19 would be in combat. Well, nobody paid much attention to that, really. Once we got rolling, they didn't ask us how old we were. They just assumed we had been assigned, and so I became 19 in March of that year. So I was 18, 19.
Wow. Your parents must have been really worried.
I really feel that I've begun to understand people who talked about the camaraderie of the military and service. Although I had gone through 6 weeks of advanced infantry training in Camp Housey, Texas, I really knew nothing about warfare. And when I joined my company and my squad, there were older people there who simply said, "Look, listen to us. We've been here. We'll teach you." And they did. I think probably I'm alive because they taught us what the shells sounded like when they were coming in. They they knew what they were like when they were coming over our heads because they were friendly and they were to get the enemy. Uh, they told us how to survive
Mhm.
in various situations. So we had a, a, a really tight community there.
So you had mentors, really. It wasn't like in Vietnam where we had so many young people over there at once.
Oh, well, it was totally different. I feel I've talked to people who've been in the and have friends and who've been in the Vietnam conflict, and that was a totally different kind of war
Right.
and warfare. I feel I use the word clean to talk about World War II. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
we knew who the enemy was. We knew how he dressed. We knew what his equipment was like. Uh, we uh, uh, we knew that he worked in divisions and battalions like we did. Uh, Vietnam must have been ghastly. I mean, you didn't know where the enemy was, who the enemy was. Uh, you were in
Hmm.
tropical weather.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
I hear you. So it's nice to have these mentors.
my situation was much more classic
Oh,
in the classic sense of
you're
warfare.
going to do classy warfare.
All of it.
And
All of
think
that.
what it was think what it was like in the 1800s then. And then everybody had all those nice
Yeah,
outfits.
we certainly didn't have that. Uh,
Right. Right.
the uh, I think what the uh, well, let me go back to the type
Yes.
of warfare that we had. Uh, I think one of the reasons that America uh, really won that war is that we just overwhelmed the enemy with equipment and firepower and air power. The German equipment, the German tanks, of course, we call Tiger tanks, were far superior to ours. They were lower to the ground. They had a much better cannon on the front of them. And the reason we won some of these battles, even with a tactician, partly because of the tactician of a person like uh, General, uh, it, it, uh, it was because we would have 6 tanks to their 1 and or
Oh,
5 or 4, and uh, this governed the way we even fought as infantrymen. Uh, if we came up against a woods and there seemed to be enemy in the woods that could shoot or destroy our tanks, they would send the infantry through the woods to clear the woods of enemy soldiers. Or we would go in and fire our rifles almost continuously, and not necessarily at some specific target.
hmm.
It's just that we laid down such a heavy barrage of fire that the enemy simply had to either be behind trees or in holes or running.
Right. Okay.
And we just overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, but then when we would clear the woods, we would go back and get with the tanks, and they'd go down and take the village or the city or whatever it was, fighting.
Still had to be hard. Now, you had quite an experience at one point, I think, and I read it in the book A Common Purpose, which
Oh, yes. Oh,
which
yes.
I thought was excellent. Excellent book done at Brookhaven about people who served during the war and what happened. And what you said there in starting your chapter was, we do not speak of war. War is captured only in the long vacant stares, in the silences, in the trembling fingers, in the memories most of us keep buried deep within us, in the tears. And Chris Hedges spoke those words in his speech in New York on the 11th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. Certainly a different war than World War II, but it applies to all wars, all veterans, all of us who were purveyors of death. It applies to me, and I only can witness. Those are very powerful words. Could you tell us about the experience that led up to that?
Well, yes, in one sense, when you were fighting in Europe, and shooting at the enemy, even when it was visible, they were your mind does something. It turns the enemy into an overcoat or an object. It was almost a virtual kind of an experience.
Yeah.
And you were part of what we understood to be really a sort of a killing machine that was moving through. But there were instances when that image was no longer valid, and I think probably referring to that passage and that story. It took place in a small village where we had the tanks had and our armored division company had moved in toward a small town, and suddenly our tank hit a mine, and it blew the tread off the tank. And these were small roads going into this village. So the whole column had to stop. And when that column stopped, we knew we were in trouble because the Germans usually planned this in such a way that they had this road zeroed in with their 88 millimeter guns. So once they trap a column of American tanks and half tracks, they could just decimate it because we were all locked into this. So they moved us. Our colonel, who was said battle-wise, immediately said, "Let's get out of here. I noticed in my chart that there's a meadow around the corner from this. If we can just break through here." So we managed to get the tanks and the half tracks into a meadow area to what would be the right of the road leading down into the village. And the tanks deployed themselves around this empty field so that they would be a difficult target. We as infantrymen then had to get out and to go through the woods to clear it out. And we so that we could then get our tanks and things in to the village. What we did is what I explained just a minute ago. We started through the woods where there were snipers and other German infantry, and we were firing in the rapid fire kind of situation. I described,
Right.
kind of overwhelming. But we got to a place where the woods was still continuing, and we were running out of ammunition. We couldn't do what we wanted, so they needed to have more ammunition. So uh, I went back in my squad. I went back to the meadow to get more ammunition for members of my squad. And I went around to the tanks, and the tanks were all buttoned up because the snipers were still shooting around. And I went to the half tracks in the tanks, and I picked up bandoliers. Those are they're cloth carriers
Yeah.
of ammunition.
Weren't you
And
terrified?
they said to me, you know, there are snipers out there. You're crazy to be walking around out here. And I said, well, I've got to get, you know, my buddies this ammunition. So I said, just throw them out, and I'll pick them up. I'll keep walking, and I'll pick them up. And which they did, and I kept walking around, and I could hear the bullets whizzing around.
Oh,
And so I picked up around 10 or so, maybe 12. They're heavy, and the M1 rifle, which I carried, was 10 pounds in itself, so I couldn't carry any more. And I started back through the woods to catch up to the front line. And I heard on the way back, I heard someone say here, and of course, German here, H-I-E-R is just sounds the same as H-E-R-E here. And I thought it was one of our soldiers that had been hit by a sniper and was wounded. And I went back and found this person lying in the woods, and it was a German soldier, not an American, and a young guy. And he had been shot in the abdomen. I don't know whether it was a 50 caliber bullet or one of ours rifles, but anyway, his stomach was ripped open, and his intestines were visible. And he said, shoot me in German, and I had enough high school German at the time, so I know exactly what he said. And I looked closely, and he was, I figure, about my age. And we were both there, as I said, two blue-eyed boys in dark woods of chaos. And he was begging me to shoot him.
yes.
But I looked into his face, into his eyes, and he had become not an enemy soldier, but a sort of he was another human being,
Right.
another kid
Right.
my age. And I simply couldn't do it. Couldn't shoot him. There was a difference between killing as a soldier in a battle situation and something that was so intimate that it was almost like a murder. And so I knew that the first unwritten law of armored warfare is you never leave a wounded soldier behind you, because you're apt to be shot in the back and wounded. So you should always dispatch that person
Oh,
And I knew that that was the case. I knew that I would be the last person to see this guy in the woods because uh, uh, I had come through the woods by myself, and there was nobody else behind me. But I simply couldn't bring myself to do it. So I kicked his rifle out of his way. He couldn't reach his rifle, uh, and left him there because I had to get the ammunition to my friends on up ahead. And I know now, as an older person, much more experienced, I think, in the nature of life and death and the like, I could do it. I could have ended his life. That would have been an act of mercy.
hmm yes.
But as a 19-year-old, just 19-year-old kid, uh, I, I, I just couldn't. And the moral dilemma of and regret for not doing that has remained with me for forever. And I don't think that there is a reasonable answer to something like that. There can only be an existential answer to something like that.
Right.
Um, so uh, that was an intimate
Mm.
kind of experience that changed my understanding, I think, of the broader nature of warfare. Um, there were other threats that I had experienced. We were constantly under German artillery fire. The air warfare was going on over our heads, and Messerschmitt 109s would strafe us. We learned how to cope with that kind of experience, but this intimate experience of one-on-one,
Yeah.
2 feet away, I just felt I had failed, and that's why the quotation that you read from the book
Yes.
spoke to me immediately.
Yeah. Well, it spoke to me. I mean, we all end up with moral dilemmas as we live our lives. And you told a story of yours, and you told it beautifully. I mean,
Right.
the idea of these two 19-year-old blue-eyed boys, both with carrying rifles, and what happens in the woods alone. It had to be really hard.
It was a very difficult situation.
Oh, it sounds it. And I thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, if you come out, it's funny, we have talked to many vets, and what do you come out of the war feeling? How has this slanted your feeling about war subsequently now?
Well, there's some ambivalence still there. I still think I think war is a hideous thing. It has to be a last resort. Um, but I came out feeling that I had been part of a incredibly powerful machine that had killed a lot of people and leveled a lot of towns. And I really felt I want to do something with the rest of my life that would be constructive, it would be helpful, sort of atone for the
Right. Right.
experiences that I've been through. And it's and so I ended up growing up in a town in Ohio where the person of greatest admiration in town was a local doctor. And I thought, well, I guess maybe I should become a doctor. When in college, I couldn't abide organic chemistry and a few of the other. I ended up going into teaching. And from teaching, I went into the ministry and became a clergyman, and then left after a few years, left the church and became a professor. But I felt I wanted to do some sort of constructive thinking.
I can see
And I am frightened by the anger that I feel in our country right now, with armed groups of citizens and with no discipline on either side of this. And having experienced that, I am apprehensive about our immediate future.
Well, you know how awful it can be and what carnage it can come of from it. So, I mean, one of the reasons we do these video interviews is so the next generation can understand what war is like and maybe get some realization of where they're leading, where they're going with some of their anger at times. And you've really helped put a handle on it and a focus for this.
Oh, thank you.
I thank you very much. It's a wonderful story you told. And the ethics of it, I mean, I'll tell my grandson tonight and let him think about what he would do in such a case. You know,
it is a difficult situation because it is so immediate and I used the word existential before, but it is that because in certain situations it would seemingly be his life or my life, and it forces people to make decisions that they neither approve nor like.
right.
And I find that appalling. You know, for all the hideous bits of war, there are some things that come out that are positive. And I'd like to just mention that warfare and the experiences in the Army gave me a sense of adaptability and patience and interdependence. I think those three things became powerful forces in my own life. I don't want to go through a war to learn those things, but there were some aspects of the experience which prepare you for living it through a pandemic, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, yes, it's a pandemic, but that's all right. I mean, we'll get through.
We'll get
We
through
can
it.
adapt. I am grateful for the fact that I got through unscathed. Of the 7 young men who joined the 10th Armored Division when I did at Bastogne, or just on the Bastogne, uh, uh, only 2 of us survived
Oh,
the rest of the war, uh, and it's
yeah.
that's a difficult thing to carry with you too.
I thank you for speaking with us today.
Well, you're more than welcome.
Yep. And I will mention again, Brookhaven residents did participate in this book called A Common Purpose, which is right here at the Lexington Library and probably at other libraries around the country. And it tells the story of many people who lived during that time. And it's fascinating. And you will see Charlie's story there. And Charlie, thank you. Go enjoy the rest of this Sunday morning. Have
Thank
a
you very
good day.
much.
Thank you.
Happy to be a visitor.
Oh,
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Bye.